On the programme, Jack B. Yates, The Outsider, a major exhibition at the Model in Sligo. Hello and welcome to Arts Tonight. This year marks the 140th anniversary of the birth of Jack B. Yates, a painter whose work and life are inextricably linked with the political and artistic life of the Irish state. Admired by Beckett, Joyce and many of his European contemporaries, close to and sometimes at odds with his brother, William Butler Yeats, the painter has arguably never received his due recognition, in part because of his brother's fame. A major new exhibition of his work, showing paintings never before seen on public display, is currently running at the Model in Sligo. It was curated by artist Brian O'Doherty and Eamon De Valera. At its core is the Yeats work collected by Nora Nyland, one-time county librarian for Sligo, whose vision paved the way for so much that has grown up around Yeats in the place he loved and where he spent formative childhood years. The gallery used to be called the Model Nyland and now has the subheading Home to the Nyland Collection. Included in the current exhibition are two paintings owned by Graham Greene, much of Yeats's early work and what's believed to be his last painting. We've been to Sligo to see the exhibition and Eamon De Valera took us around. Eamon, the theme, The Outsider, why did you choose that and what, in what way are you looking at Jack B. Yeats as an outsider figure, as in a sense an outsider artist?
Well, not so much as an outsider artist, but we wanted to look at this kind of preoccupation that Yeats had with the outsider personas, and it's really a fascination that he has had throughout his entire career. This exhibition concentrates on oils, but we can trace the development of his interest in outsiders right from his watercolour period, right through these oils. We also wanted people to ask the question, was Yeats an outsider? Did he feel like an outsider? And I think, you can argue... We can never say how he actually felt, but you can argue that he probably did. He wasn't, at a very basic level, he wasn't even raised in the same family and the same house as his siblings with his parents. He was raised back here in Sligo with his grandparents, so perhaps he felt like an outsider even within his own family. He never studied art formally, he never taught art, so unlike an awful lot of artists, he didn't affiliate himself with any particular school. He really kind of ploughed his own field in terms of his artistic practice. We also kind of maybe politically, he was quite a political person, and he was, even though he was a member of the ascendancy class and an Anglo-Irishman, he really identified himself with the Republican cause and with ordinary Irish people. But, there's also a question there of did he really ever fit in, or could he ever really fit in? Was he an outsider in that regard as well?
Let's have a look at some of the work here in what is the first of 5 rooms of paintings here in the Model. 1927, Man in a Train Thinking. And I was saying earlier that I've always felt that Jack B. Yeats is a poet in the titles for the paintings. The conversation was under the rose and the folded heart and some beautiful titles. But this is a beautiful painting.
It is a very rich painting, and I think you're right there about the titles. They often lend this extra dimension to the work. Often the titles refer to something that's actually happening outside of the frame of the painting, and I think that's a really interesting thing. We'll see further examples of that. Trains were really important to Yeats, and we'll see when we look at some of the work that travelling was very important. You were neither here nor there, you were in transit in this kind of no man's land, and it's almost like a lot of his work tries to kind of freeze this moment in time. And I think that was one of the reasons that he was very interested in trains.
And Moments Frozen in Time, another lovely painting here. And again, we often see, as you mentioned, the performer, the singer several times, and this singing the Minstrel Boy, 1923.
Again, yeah, he was very interested in singers. He presents several people in the middle of song. Again, it's that moment frozen in time that he likes to celebrate. A lot of his titles came from the titles of Thomas More's melodies.
How do we see, and as you know, we'll walk and look at some of the paintings as we go, but I presume that, going from the earliest work, Emer, up to his last painting, what's believed to be his last, that you see the change, the development, and the later work becoming very different.
That's right. I mean, the early work, in this gallery we see the early work from 1910 really to the mid-1920s. The style of this work is very simple, very muted colours, fixed lines. There's a lovely quote by Yeats himself when he was describing the change that came later. He said that every artist, when he starts to paint, wants to express himself with line. But as he grows in confidence, he realises that line is actually keeping him in. And when he has enough confidence, he'll break free of the confines of line entirely. And that's what we see, this change that came. These paintings, really fixed lines, muted colours, a very simple style. depicting the Ireland of the time. You know, Yeats was very keenly aware that he was living in very turbulent times. During the
This is Capel Street, 1923 in Dublin. You see a single figure, a young woman. I think she's a street seller in a doorway, a basket of flowers beside her, and a baby in her arms. So, in a sense, it's a portrait of poverty, but there's a richness again. You get a glimpse in the background of sweets, jars of sweets in a window, the beginning of lettering. But as you say, muted and really very, very striking.
It's a very poignant scene, this one. You know, I think Yeats really wanted to kind of represent and be a voice for these outsider figures, these people who were marginalised, and I think there's a real sense of urban isolation in this painting.
And another, this is Sligo.
This is a Sligo scene.
And two figures, it's a beautiful, that blue again, that Yeats blue, which is so wonderful, the night sky there.
That's right. This is a western town in the night. And here we see there's actually a third figure. He's almost hidden here at the very far left corner. A door seems to be opening. We see a shaft of light shining out onto the street, and an impish kind of character peeps around right at the viewer.
There's somebody saying to me that it's very striking with Yeats' work that the more you look, the more you find, and very often detail emerges that you're not aware of at all at first.
That's right. Somebody told me on the night of the opening that Anne Yates, Jack's niece, when she decided to become a painter, decided the first place she should start was with her uncle's work. So she went to the National Gallery and looked at the works. And she eventually realised that you can't go to the works and see everything instantly. You should sit and let the works come to you. And I thought that was an excellent way of summing it up. I think you really do need to spend a lot of time with these paintings. And we were conscious of that in The Hang. We tried to give every painting a lot of space so that people have time and just, you know, plenty of white space to be able to, every painting to stand on its own.
Let's move on maybe and have a look at some of the slightly later work.
Okay.
And of course, there's also the political scenes. This painting, again, actually is, I suppose, a very important scene in terms of Irish politics, Communicating with Prisoners, 1924.
That's right. We have two very important Civil War scenes, two very important Civil War paintings in this exhibition. Communicating with Prisoners is maybe a little bit more of a feminine work than the other one, The Funeral of Harry Boland. And here we see probably a scene that Yeats happened upon when he walked around Dublin. We see Kilmainham Jail, and a crowd of women have gathered at the front of the jail. Up here there are some female prisoners who we can only guess may have broken the glass in order to communicate with their friends. Yeats was always very sympathetic and very respectful in his portrayal of women. And I think this is a really nice scene, and perhaps, you know, he's suggesting that human nature will always be what it is. Life will always go on, even against the backdrop of, you know, maybe a horrible and very unnecessary war.
And of course, then this is the other great political painting, if you like, The Funeral of Harry Boland.
That's right, The Funeral of Harry Boland. It's, you know, very well considered. The composition is incredibly well considered. It all happens in the shadow of O'Connell's memorial in Glasnevin Cemetery. We see this kind of seething tensions of the time are very present. We see Harry Boland, of course, was an activist who had died as a result of a very heavy-handed arrest in the Skerries Hotel. At the time, he was on the anti-treaty side, but he had been chosen, because he was such a popular figure, he had been chosen to try and find peace and work in the background. So the fact that he had died was a tragedy for both sides, on both sides of the divide. We see here one of his old companions and best friends, in fact, Kevin O'Higgins, standing at the foot of the grave. Over here then we have some rebels from the other side who have risked their lives to come to the funeral in order to, they're resting on their rifles here in order to fire a volley in salute. Over here then we have Cumann na Man and other mourners. Here we have two figures in conversation, which again probably represents, you know, the human spirit and the fact that life will still go on. I think, you know, Yeats was quite Republican, but I think this painting, more than anything, is a hymn to the tragedy of the Civil War and the horrible waste.
It was 1922, and you have both sides depicted here. And again, I suppose many people would be surprised maybe to realise that Kevin O'Higgins was there in the funeral, and here's a record of the fact.
That's right. However, you know, Kevin O'Higgins was a Free State minister at that time, so he was less, you know, the fact that he was here was less risky, in fact, than these characters here who were rebels.
Eamon, walking into this room again, a great sense of light and space in the new model, but also a striking difference in the style of paintings that we see, even looking to the end. Here's a very different Jack B. Yeats' landscape to what we've seen before?
Yes, from the kind of mid-1920s, Yeats began to experiment with this new style, which he developed throughout the 30s and 40s. The works in here are mostly from the 40s, early 50s. His handling of the paint became much more free. He broke free, as he said himself, from the confines of the line. His outlines are much more blurred. I think, the subject matter is almost obliterated and obscured in some paintings. Again, his subject matter did remain the same in these works as it had in the early 1920s. However, he began to imbue the works with a much more mystical meaning. No longer was it a straightforward depiction of a traveller or a street singer, but these characters seem to take on this new allegorical meaning. Again, the palette is very different. He begins to work now in very vibrant colours, sometimes just in the three primary colours and white, and he actually mixed, his paintings with a palette knife on the canvas.
Two Graham Greene paintings originally owned by Graham Greene, Jack B. Yeats' paintings owned by Graham Greene in the exhibition here. And this, A Horseman Enters a Town at Night, again 1948, a wonderful title, wonderful painting.
Yes, a wonderful painting, very dark colours but with flashes of really bright red and yellow. We see the horseman, he's coming into the town, he's passed by some buildings, he's making his approach up a street. Now the horseman was a very mystical figure. Again, his uncle George had been a horse trainer. George had been an incredibly important character in Yeats' early life here in Sligo. So, there's a possibility that he may have associated this horseman with his Uncle George.
But a very striking use of colour in this painting.
Really beautiful use of colour, and it's actually very unusual for Jack at this time because it's predominantly, he did use an awful lot of blue. He didn't normally go this dark. So it's quite unusual, especially with the flashes of pink and green and red and yellow.
Emer, I suppose a room of circus paintings, and that also seems to go to the heart of a great deal of Yeats's concerns. And again, that notion of the outsider figure and his exploration of that sense of the outsider in community.
Mm-hmm. The figure of the clown was really important for Yeats, possibly because one clown that he chose to depict quite a bit was Johnny Patterson, who was a very famous Irish clown who had gone to America, made his fortune, come back and set up a circus here in Ireland. Patterson was quite a political figure and he always composed and sang his own songs for the crowd. Yeats would have gone to see Patterson himself when he was a child in Athlone. But in 1989, when Yeats would have been 18 years of age, Patterson sang a very political song that he had composed himself, and the crowd turned on him, and in the ensuing melee, Patterson was fatally injured. So he certainly was this outsider figure. The clown, I suppose, outwardly happy and comic, but inwardly, maybe cutting a slightly pathetic figure with his painted smile. Somebody who didn't belong to the people, who was the ultimate outsider. He's not painting this as a contemporary scene. He's painting it in retrospect, from memory and imagination, I suppose. That's right. Well, memory was incredibly important to him and became more and more important as he got older. He kept a visual diary. He always travelled with a sketchbook from when he was in his early 20s. So he sketched everything he saw about him in everyday life, and he often revisited these sketchbooks, we know, 40, 50 years later. So this is probably, or highly likely from a sketch that he did even as a child. Emer, we're here looking at what's believed to be Jack Yeats' last painting, The Top of the Tide from 1955-56, and two figures in a landscape, and again that kind of smudged ambiguity. That's right. This painting would have been catalogued by Yeats in 1956, just a year before he died, so we know it's one of his very last paintings. It's prophetic, I suppose, in a way that it's called The Top of the Tide because it is as expressionistic as his style gets, and some people would argue that this is his only expressionist painting, that the other paintings really are late romantic. Again, it's of these two figures in the landscape. And I think something Brian O'Doherty said in an early essay is really interesting, that in recent Irish mythology, everyone who was anyone was on the run. All these figures are presented in the landscape, teachers, soldiers, rebels, priests even. They were all cast out or had to leave their homes, and I think that could be one possible interpretation of these travellers.
Eamon McGarry there. Also in the model, I met Stella Mew of the Yates Society and painter Nick Miller. Stella, this exhibition surely a great tribute to Northern Ireland and to her memory and her gift to Sligo.
Absolutely. I think it's wonderful. I think she would be thrilled to see it coming home here and to see the array of paintings and to realise that from the tiny beginnings that she had and from her trips out in the little Volkswagen bringing back Jack Yeats paintings wrapped in rugs in the back of the car, to think that it's grown to this, it really is a wonderful tribute to her. She had a vision and she followed it totally. And last year we had the paintings, some of the Nyland collection, on loan down in what was then the Sligo Art Gallery in the Yates Memorial Building. And it is a tremendous draw. Whenever you put Yates on display, it will draw the people in. And that's why I would love to see at least one of the gallery rooms here permanently housing the Yates collection and putting it on display, because it is so marvellous. It's the thing which is unique to this gallery. I mean, exhibitions can come and go of different painters, and there's room for that as well, of course, but people come to Sligo expecting to see Yates.
And of course, the Nyland collection, should be said as well, is not just Jack B. Yeats paintings. It contains, among others, Nick Miller, some of your work. And I suppose that again is a significant part of what has been built here. Is building a collection of contemporary art. But when did you first become aware of Yeats's work?
Well, funny enough, I mean, I feel a remarkable affinity because, a bit like Yeats, I'm an outsider. I'm Bloom to my entry into Irish culture began. I grew up in London, and Yeats came from London, but came to Sligo eventually. And I came to Ireland in 1984, and have spent since '92, I've spent a long time engaging with the landscape around Sligo and the full county of Sligo and Leitrim and the northwest. So I feel a huge kind of affinity with the journey. I don't always feel it with the paintings, but I feel it with the journey of the man and the painter. And he was completely, utterly unique in Irish painting. Nothing before him and nothing after him. It's a remarkable achievement, but a strange one.
Brian O'Doherty, in one of his essays in the book, The Outsider, with the exhibition, describes Yeats as a European master and says a romantic, perhaps expressionist. Is that a reading you'd go with?
I would, and I think one of the fantastic things about this exhibition is those collection of essays by Brian O'Doherty and the others in the catalogue. It's a little hard to read in small print, but if you get to read it, it's a fantastic kind of in-depth look at who Yeats was and is in Irish culture. And from somebody like Brian O'Doherty, who's had a significant role in contemporary art himself in the States and worldwide, and is, it's a treasure. And his understanding is deep and also personal. It's not a kind of intellectual, academic response. It's a deeply personal, felt response to the paintings. Very interesting and worth reading.
And again, actually, some of Yeats's late work, some of the work was there in the exhibition The Moderns at IMA recently. So again, a lot of debate about whether or not, Yeats was a modernist in that sense.
See, for me,
how would you feel about that?
Does
it matter?
No, it doesn't matter at all. In the history of painting, there are painters who have followers and it changes traditions and that. Yeats isn't that. He's just a unique moment in painting history. It does relate to Kokoschka, it does relate to a lot of European painting, but not necessarily and not exclusively. It was a particular journey to do with Irish culture and him as an outsider in this culture, embodying it and taking it into himself and producing a body of work which everybody now acknowledges as really the most recognisably Irish painting of that period. An interesting one.
Stella, do you have a favourite painting or a series of paintings from the work here?
Yes, it's hard to pick out just one, but we're standing looking at the Island Funeral at the moment, and that one is a painting which I find absolutely compelling. It links John Millington Synge, who was a friend of Yeats. in my mind, with the Aran Islands, and particularly with that wonderful play Riders to the Sea. And you got there all the poignancy of the funeral, the faces of the old people, and the whole sense that you get of the death having taken place, the hopelessness of going towards the burial, the sea and the almost oily calm of the waves there, and the boat going alongside. The man leaning up against the mast. It's a little bit like Auden's poem, Musée de Beaux-Arts, where something significant is taking place, and yet there's the indifference in the face of the man leaning against the mast. He can is trying to distance himself from it, and yet the agony is there.
A bit of fear of death there too, in his look, leaning against the mast. He's kind of looking at the coffin like, oh God, I'm going there one day.
That's right.
And
yes.
You can see him gasping for a drink somewhere,
Yes.
like he's got a bottle in the pocket.
Cast a cold eye on life, on death.
And on the sea.
Exactly.
I mean, I think these paintings from that period are fascinating because they're the transitional paintings from the very illustrative period to he's just opening up. So the period from the early 20s to 27, that transition is phenomenal. And you see the confidence of the painter growing and becoming totally alive. And these particular paintings, like the funeral of Harry Boland and this, the crossing, the coffin in the boat.
To my mind as well, you get it in the paintings, the Liffey Swim, and in the Island Bridge Regatta, where you get the spectators along the side, and he catches them absolutely in the moment of concentration on what they're looking at, and you look with them and see through their eyes as well as through your own.
But it's interesting in that these ones hold the illustrative moment which he grew up with. He was an illustrator essentially.
Absolutely.
And yet they are beginning to become, well, they are fantastically strong compositional paintings, and they also hold Irish history, and nobody else was doing that. Nobody else was holding history in the same way.
Communicating with prisoners particularly is one of those. But what you were talking about, how he caught an episode and caught it just for a second as it was, that to my mind is epitomised in the Singing Horseman, where you get the ecstasy of the man, his head flung back singing and the horse resonating with the rider, and it's just a magical picture.
I think you were particularly taken with the late work, Nick.
Yeah, I really like these small. There's three small ones here, which are the transitional ones, but then the late work is what I suppose internationally and otherwise people regard as his kind of masterworks. But I think the later paintings are extraordinary in the context of the world he was painting in, because they related to nothing that was around him.
But isn't it interesting how he didn't want his paintings to be reproduced? And the difference between a reproduction and the original, I find going into the National Gallery in Dublin, into the slightly darkened rooms, the paintings glow on the walls, and they're absolutely living. It's as if he painted them last week.
If you look at this exhibition in the third and final room at the back there, what's extraordinary is these tiny paintings hold huge walls without any problem. Which is some achievement. They really sing in the space.
It is a wonderful exhibition, and they've brought together here now so many paintings, ones which haven't been seen before, like the Graham Greene paintings. And it's a marvellous achievement to hang an exhibition like this. One just wishes it could last even longer than June.
Well, that fantastic painting down there, the paper bags on the head, on the Dublin street sellers, that could be painted by, with one shift of a moment, it could be one of the most contemporary German painters painting it. It just has that kind of... But it's not. And what's interesting is, and Brian O'Doherty points it out in his essays, how really most contemporary younger artists wouldn't be particularly interested in Yeats. It's not that they don't love it, it's not that they're not interested as a punter, as a person, but in terms of contemporary art, there's a gap. And the gap is you can almost pinpoint it as his lack of irony in the paintings. In his writings he had irony, but in the paintings there's none. It's a pure, direct expression of his very personal painting journey. And that's kind of a little not allowed at the moment in contemporary art.
Not so fashionable.
Not so fashionable anymore. But that, I think that doesn't mean it isn't... the paintings, I think, will continue to grow in stature over the time because it's such a complete and clear body of work.
It's interesting that Jack Yates presented one of his own favourite paintings to the municipality of Sligo, and he gave the painting that he had given as a present to Cotty. And it's the picture of Cotty and his uncle, George Pollexfen, walking along at Ross's Point. Right. And the three figures are coming along together. And that was a very special painting because Cotty, his wife, Mary Cottenham White, was such a support to him. And after she died, he really very much fell apart. But he presented that painting to Sligo. He felt it should come back here. And I think it was a mark of his love of the place that he gave it. It's rather poignant to see that picture and to know how much it meant to him.
It's kind of, that Sligo connection is extraordinary because, I live now for the last couple of years in Ross's Point, and I can't help but see in his work a very true memory of things, even though what is apparently to many people sort of unreadable wildness in the paint is actually a very accurate memory. And I can enter that sometimes when I see them. I can't do it all the times, and the same painting disappears on me from time. But when I'm in that moment with him, I can see exactly, almost topographically.
Yes, particularly in Memory Harbour, that picture that W.B. so liked that Jack had painted, the foreshortened view of Ross's Point and the road with the horse and cart coming up and the old pilot standing there with the expansive white shirt. And W.B. wrote that he could see in that man's face the features that he had known so well, the old pilot with whom he'd gone out in the boat so many times. It really meant such a great deal to the two brothers.
Nick, what are you working on yourself these days?
Well, funnily enough, I've been when I moved from South Sligo to Ross's Point, I was trying to find a way to get out of Sligo landscape for a bit, and I spent some time in America, in Connecticut, in close to Thoreau's Walden's Pond, and I did a piece in the Joseph Albers Foundation, a 360-degree view from a tree house. And I showed that in Dublin last autumn, but I just got word yesterday, which is great, that as part of Culture Island's Imagine Island programme, I've got a venue to bring it right to Thoreau's hometown in Concord in Massachusetts for a 2-month show in the summer. So I'm absolutely flying to date, which was great news because I'd been trying to bring that piece of work back to America because it's a very American painting, and so I'm just in great form with that.
So American landscape.
It's one very big American landscape, and But I still have my Sligo Ben Bulben in the background in my studio, so I've yet to really tackle North Sligo. It's a different landscape to... I was on Lough Arrow before, which is one of the most remarkable landscapes of Ireland, in my opinion. And now in North Sligo, Ben Bulben is so imposing, and it's such a known landscape, and it's far more Yeatsian, so I have a little more distance from it. And
it's fascinating to hear you talk about Thoreau's Walden, because that book was read to W.B. Yeats by his father, John Butler Yeats, and it gave him the idea of living alone on an island and is behind the Lake Isle of Innisfree.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. That's fantastic.
Connects.
It all connects.
Nick Miller and Stella Mew there. You're listening to Arts Tonight. We're visiting Jack B. Yates, The Outsider, an exhibition at the Model. Seamus Kelly, director of the Model. We're here in what is the artist studio in the Model, and I suppose that's a feature of what the building now represents, is that there are studio facilities available for people. There is the possibility of people spending time here, and of course from here as well there's an extraordinary view of Ben Bulben. And I presume that in the development of the building, there was a consciousness all the time of trying to reflect that larger landscape of Sligo.
Absolutely. We know that from the early design phase and conversations with the architect, with the board of directors and the previous director, Sarah Glennie, conversations with artists, those who have always been stakeholders of the models. There's always been this relationship between the landscape and the building as the design period was going, and of course it's reflected now in what you see. And I think it's really critical. For example, we're talking now about artists in residence, and this summer we have a painter named Etienne Zach, who's a Quebecois painter based in LA now. And well before he's come over, he wants to know about Sligo. He wants to know about the mythology and history here. And I sent over this catalog you're holding, in fact, the Ousider, of Jack B. Yates' work. We're going to bring him into the collection so he can look at the collection, respond to it, because his work as a painter, he is a bit of a maverick, and manipulates all sorts of imagery from all different sources. And we'll see that as well. I think with artists who stay here, they'll be responding to the landscape, responding to the history and the culture in a more contemporary context, like Etienne. So it's really it's a fascinating and exciting space for artists to be.
We spoke before the building opened with yourself and Stella Mew about, I suppose, what was a controversy at the time about the naming of the building, whether Northern Ireland's legacy was fully acknowledged in terms of the renaming of the building as the model. And as now we have this big Yates exhibition, and it is drawn on the Island collection, and that's very clear. All the way through the building, it has to be said. And are you satisfied that her legacy, if you like, is duly acknowledged in the model, in the building, apart from the name, right throughout it?
Well, definitely. I mean, again, that's also an ongoing project. I think, as I stressed last year, we don't pay tribute to someone's work and their legacy simply by naming a building or a gallery or a space after that person. I think you have to build a story and build a project around particular legacies, and that's what we've done with Northern Ireland. We'll continue to do. We have an ongoing project being developed on the website, Story of Northern Ireland. We pay tribute to her through the collection. There's a rotating collection on all the time that is in her honor and in her as out of respect for what she contributed to local culture. So I think it's about building a project and building a story around people, like important figures like Northern Ireland.
The exhibition, the Yates exhibition, I think was originally due to open last summer, last July or so, and is now running from February to June. Why the delay in the first place? And then, would it have been possible at all to extend the exhibition, for instance, to run over the summer when obviously there'll be more tourists in Sligo, more visitors who might be interested in Yates's work?
Well, firstly, in the first part, we did decide to move the exhibition to now out of prudence and for proper care of the collection. We felt that we wanted to make sure that the building was completely 100% functional. And at that time, it was about 98% functional. And, being someone who's worked with art all my life, all my professional life, we didn't want to take any risks. And we want to assure the collectors and people who own those works that there were none, and there aren't any. So we did use a measure of prudence. And the timing, I think, works out quite well for us now. It did enable us to develop the project a little bit more, develop more, again, mediation around the project, and have a symposium that happened in advance of the project, and build more public relations around the project and so on. And then in terms of the exhibition extending into the summer, what we will do, and as I just mentioned, is we do have the Nyland Gallery, which is dedicated for our collection and dedicated, to rotate that collection in thematic exhibitions. And that's what we'll do, in terms of that touristic need, or the desire for people to come in the building and have more of an experience with more historical aspects of our collection. It's always there.
I suppose it's not that one wants to emphasise Jack B. Yates at the expense of other contemporary artists and what you're trying to do here. And indeed, again, it should be said that the Nyland collection contains a great deal more than Jack B. Yates. And exactly. I suppose that's one of the very striking features of it. Right. But will there be, for a visitor to Sligo, for instance, will there always be an opportunity to see even a few Jack B. Yateses here at the model?
I'd say there'd be few times when they wouldn't be able to. our emphasis is on contemporary art. That's my background. That's my expertise. But again, the collection will always be there, and we will emphasize Jack B. Yeats' work, of course.
Long term, then, Seamus, I mean, I know that the development here was originally intended to be part of, if you like, a larger arts complex where you enter now the model from what was the back, and there had been a plan for a larger development around there, which we hope may happen, but these straitened times can never be sure. How do you foresee the model shaping and developing, we'll say, over the next 5 years?
Well, firstly, the question is getting through the 5 years. We know that it will be a more difficult period than it may have been in the past, and I think that's really exciting for us. It is going to be more challenging for all institutions, and now it's a matter of scaling back larger budgets into more modest budgets and realizing projects for less and so on, which is all very doable. It is all very doable, and we don't need to build...
So it must be very difficult as well.
I won't tell you about it, Vincent. I don't want to depress your listeners. But, really, it is... Those are good challenges. I'd like to stress that here at the model, we're a team, and everybody is part of that team, from the 40 volunteers we have working with us to the 5 interns that come in and work really hard and determined to make this space into what it is. All the staff who should be commended, our technical manager, the curator, Eamon De Valera, our education program. Again, it's really tackling the ongoing project as a team. And that, for me, I think is what we need to build on, is that, firstly. We have that as an immediate resource. Everybody's hearts are in the project, and from there you can only build up.
Seamus Keeley, director of the model there. And down the road from the model in Sligo is the County Library and County Museum, where the Nyland collection began. Donald Tinney is County Librarian in Sligo. Donald, Nora Nyland actually lived in an apartment upstairs here.
That's correct. When she came here in the 40s, she identified the manse as a potential building for a library, along with the church alongside. And it was purchased in the 50s, and she moved into the apartment above. One of the privileges of being county librarian at the time, I may add, is now removed as a privilege.
No longer a privilege.
No, yes.
And the Nyland collection, if you like, began its life here in this building.
Very much so. When Nora first came here from Galway, she recognised very early that there was very little to commemorate the work of the Yates family. And she set about collecting material and artefacts and memorabilia, and using her widespread contacts to source material. And so in 1955, the museum was set up with a view to exhibiting Yeats material.
And even now, there's an extraordinary amount of material here, and very striking material. There's this beautiful portrait of Jack Yates by Stella Sullivan'S. And again, that has its own history.
Indeed it has, Vincent, because, this is a very important painting of Jack. And one of the main reasons why Stella Sullivan'S is in the collection is her association with the nationalist movement, the rising in 1916, because she lived on Morehampton Road there in Dublin, and it was apparently a safe house at that time. So it had all the credentials, both in terms of art quality and background, for Nora to collect as well.
And as well as that portrait, in terms of art, there are a number of broadsheets of Jack's work from very early on, 1903, right through from January to September 1903, and a mixture of his coloured drawings and poems. Would you describe one for us, Donald? I mean, that maybe here from May, it's quite a striking series.
Well, we have already an interest for Jack. He was always interested in the sea. In fact, it was the sea that brought the Yeats connection here in the first place. Pollocksfin family were connected with the Sligo Steam Navigation Company. And he was always interested in pirates and sailing and ships. And we have one here of showing a sailor dancing with a young wench. I think they would have called it in those days, not politically correct at the moment. Also, you have a sort of a bark here with oarsmen in it as well, and a pirate ship below that. And it's documenting 5 or 6 stanzas here of different tales of sailing and that.
And of course, when WB's body was brought back for burial in Sligo, the original intention or hope was that it would land, that his body would actually be taken in from sea off the coast here, but that wasn't possible.
Indeed. In 1948, when the interment of W.B. Yeats was taking place, the Elie Macha was commissioned to go down to the south of France to collect the remains and bring the body back here to Sligo. But apparently what's said at the time was that there were shifting sands in the harbour there, so it came in at Galway Bay Harbour and came up by road from Galway to here in Sligo.
Very unusual for the time was there's a film, and I hadn't known about this, of that day in Sligo when Yates's body came back for burial at Drumcliff. And we're looking at that, and at the moment we're looking at this, at Ben Bulben and that famous mountain. But it actually, it's this remarkable document of a day and a time and people.
Indeed, we were very fortunate to come across this movie. It was made by a man by the name of Kevin Murray, who was a local businessman here in Sligo, who happened to have an airplane at the time and had camera collection, very much interested in photography. Apparently he was only one of two other people in the country, one was Trinity, I think, and one was UCC, to have a camera of this calibre. And he went about filming and documenting Sligo life and that. And we have some collections of his cameras in the museum. We also have this beautiful film that he made of the interment of Yeats. And it's a great documentary again, showing the style and fashion, if you're interested in that thing, as well as the number of dignitaries that visited that day.
Jack there, walking behind the hearse, Yeats' wife Georgie, and many other. Tell us about some of the other people who were
in it as well. You will see son and daughter Michael and Anne Yeats, and no need to describe who they are. They're famous in their own right. And you can also see in the background Sean McBride, of course, the link back to Maud Gonne and W.B.
And a quick glimpse of Eamon De Valera.
That's right. He's sitting in the limousine, I would describe it, and he's been looked upon like a film star by the locals there, and they're peering in at him. But also in it, there's a very interesting thing. There's a lady there pushing a princess pram. Anyone from the 60s will remember those were around in those days. But she walks all the way out from Sligo. It shows the film starts with coming into Pierce Road, Sligo, and they walk all the way apparently out to Drumcliff, and there she is again in the images there as well.
And all these children walking along, people pushing bicycles, and it's clear that many of the local people of Sligo came out on the day, not only to watch what was happening, but to participate.
Obviously a huge event, and rightly so. It was very important.
And of course, then something else that I didn't know was here in this building is W.B. Yeats' Nobel Medal for Literature.
Absolutely, a real gem. We in Sligo are very, very appreciative of the Yeats family for giving this on loan back in 1963, and it has remained here since then on display along with the citation. It's not very often people get to see a Nobel medal and the citation presented.
A rare opportunity to get close to a Nobel Literature medal. And put on the gloves for due care and reverence. And it's beautiful.
You don't get to see the verse, so we have to turn it around from time to time. It's double-sided, obviously, and it's made from solid gold.
Very heavy.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
W.B. Yeats, 1923. There's something very moving about not only holding this, but knowing that it's here in Sligo, and in a sense, belonging to the people, which I presume is what he would have wanted.
Well, the Yates family down through the years have always been very supportive of being here in Sligo. In any request we've made of them, they've always come up trumps, and this is one case in point. It's a very important part of the collection here.
I presume you get a lot of visitors coming in here.
We do. We get at the moment we get about 6,000 or 7,000 a year on average in a good year, but it's increasing now that we've got the model and we've got the Yates Society pushing on a different front as well. They are bringing in a lot of visitors from abroad, from Japan, Korea, and places like that, because Yates is very, very popular in Japan because of his interest in their culture as well, the no plays and that in particular. So it is a very popular item in our museum, and the tours come here to visit it.
Donald Tinney, Sligo County Librarian there. Brian O'Doherty, you're joining us from New York. You co-curated this exhibition at the Model. Why the title, The Outsider?
That was Eamon McGarry, my co-curator. In fact, she was very much the curator. I was just trotting along behind her. She did a wonderful job, and she had read an essay that I'd done on Jack Yeats' Promise and Regret for Roger McHugh back in 1971, I think it was, in which she was taken by the outsider aspect of that, an Anglo-Irishman who went native in a very interesting way. And the journey of John Millington Synge and Jack Butler Yeats together through the West as young men is an extraordinary piece of iconography in our culture. These two Anglos who contributed so much to our heritage, the two of them there who were outsiders by birth and religion to a degree, and who became intrinsic to the very life of the people, and people. That was so important for Jack Yeats. He had a tremendous appreciation, and affection was a word that he used very, very often. There are two words, in fact, affection and farewell. He had a great affection for the individual, and particularly the underprivileged individual, of which there are always plenty. But back then, in the West, particularly in the West, all the outsiders and travelers and circus men and sailors and all those on the edge of society are on the margins of the sea. The sea was so important to Jack Yeats. Those were very important for him, and he eventually became their troubadour. He became their poet. He became their Homer.
And of course, you yourself knew Jack Yeats. I think you were about the same age now, more or less, as Yeats was when you met him.
That's true.
What do you remember of him?
Yes, I'm now what we politely call in my senior years, and the same age as a young fellow when I met Jack Butler Yeats, and he was very kind to me. He was a kindly fellow, a kindly man, and so I got an introduction to him from somebody called Mrs. McCarville, who was a lecturer in literature, I believe, at UCD, University College. And I would go through the little ceremony of calling up, and the matron would filter carefully his visitors, arrange a date, and you went upstairs there in Portobello, the nursing home over the canal, where Jack Yeats was spending his senior years, his terminal years, really. And he would have a little table set up, and he'd be sitting before the window, and the curtain would be filtering the light. And he would, a little table in front of him, and he'd wear a little scarf with a big pin in the scarf, and sometimes with a skull cap, a knitted cap. And on the table would be a bottle of sherry and a couple of glasses, and he'd pour you a glass of sherry, and then he'd talk. And he talked about everything. He had a great stream. He was a great talker. And he's a great talker, and his narratives, his stories, or his non-stories, are endless in his writings. The Charmed Life is a wonderful book, and it just starts without a chapter heading, and it ends several hundred pages later with no chapter headings, like one long breath, one long exhalation. Now, he was very kind to me, but the one thing he wouldn't talk about at all was the trade, the aesthetics of our trade, which is what we artists talk about all the time. Engineers talk about their trade, and poets talk about theirs, and we artists, we talk about our trade, and the ideas that are determining it and leading us, that we sift through and criticize and follow and construct our own world out of. And Jack wouldn't talk about that at all. He was sort of phobic towards any discussion of aesthetics at all. Now, Cézanne was very much in the air when Jack was in the first decade of the last century. And Jack was born in 71, between 29 and 39 perhaps. He heard a lot about Cézanne, who was becoming the great icon of modernism. And there would be a lot of talk from the English critic Roger Fry, talking about Cézanne, and Jack would give a very Irish answer. This is what Tom McGreevy, the former director of the National Gallery, told me. Jack would say, "Says who, says who." So he was a quick-witted and a lovely man, and he recommended me for the scholarship that brought me to America, got me out of very dark post-war Ireland.
In your essay, Jack B. Yeats, The Persistence of Politics, in the book accompanying the exhibition, you recall, as you say, the young shaver that was yourself, writing enthusiastic effusions sanctifying the artist Yeats in the early 50s. How has your reading of him changed in the years since?
Considerably. I think that he was a very uneven artist. I think that he was always spontaneous, and he was always in search of the lyric effusion. And the lyricist is a hit-or-miss occasion. Lyrics come or they don't come. And in fact, that's what he said to me once. He said, it comes, and if it doesn't come, then you have to break off and clean up everything and your palette and retire and come back again another time. So he puzzles me, and I've grown into, I think, a very profitable puzzlement about Jack Yeats. That is, you look at a painting, and it looks like a mess. You come back the next day, and it's transcendent and extraordinary. So there is a great mystery at the core, at the center of Jack Yeats. The mystery, I suppose, of what's called creativity, creative energy, the lyrical afflatus. And like the old Titian, in a way, it was more tragic. But Jack was producing masterpieces well into his 80s, as was Edward Hopper. And sometimes looking at some of the work in that exhibition, I'm astonished at the energy he summoned for each painting. There is a tremendous energy that must have left him exhausted. But by the way, I'd like to say something, Vincent, about recovering Jack Yeats. We haven't had an exhibition for about 20 years, so we forget that you have to recover all our cultural figures for each generation. We have to reclaim them and reinvent the terms on which we reclaim them. And that was what I was trying to do in a very critical way, but not mean-spirited, but to determine where the Yeats studies might go. Eamon McGarry and I had many conversations about that, and we finally decided that the early Yeats, that's the Yeats of the late teens, and the Yeats of the 20s, the Liffey Swim, all those paintings, they're wonderful. They're the Bachelor's Walk of Memory, all the work he did in the Civil War, particularly the two paintings, The Funeral of Harry Boland and Communicating with Prisoners. They are remarkable paintings. Then there is the later work from the 30s on, which has its own phases, but there is the energy sometimes overwhelms the painting. But he managed to produce, in the midst of that very rich matrix that he produced, some extraordinary paintings that bring him out of the local Irish environs into international and European status, something that Samuel Beckett, responded to very well. And I think he influenced Beckett in some ways. And my colleague Eamon has pointed out that there are two figures meeting on the heath, on a blasted heath, as it were, and they're a little like Beckett's Didi and Gogo. Also, there's an influence, I think, that Jack Yeats's writings may have had some influence on Malloy. I'm not enough of a scholar to know that, but I have that feeling. And if you have the feeling, there may be something to it. But I'm talking too much.
Not at all. You say that artists who are loved by artists are never forgotten. And I'm wondering how important a presence Jack B. Yeats has been in your own life as an artist.
Very little. It's interesting that I've had a very divided life. Insofar as a writer on art, I've often written about people to which my own art is entirely opposite. So I have I think, been able to maintain a critical distance from work that is not entirely sympathetic to my inner obsessions, and deal with it fairly uncritically. Jack Yeats would be a terrible influence. A terrible influence because the influence would be so obvious that it would be merely a form of submission and copying. And we all, of course, are intoxicated with the idea of originality. And Jack Yeats is dangerous to copy. I honor him for many things. I honor him for the fact that he came from nowhere. There was nothing in the Ireland of Jack Yeats' early years, or in the society at that time, turbulent as it was, that would explain his origins. And explanations, true or false, are always looked for and sought. But Jack lived through revolution, civil war, and he was, in the best sense of the word, a patriot and a Republican always. Very different from his brother, I think, who was, as we remember, he was much more rhymed. His ideas rhymed more with the early Irish government in 22, and where he became a senator, etc. But we won't go into that. But they were very different. But the sympathies between the two of them were maintained. I think he wrote very sympathetically, W.B. did, about Jack Yeats' writings, particularly The Charmed Life. It's a book I'd recommend, by the way. And it's full of characters and full of wonderful phrases. And I would put that on the curriculum for Irish kids in national school if I had my way.
Your own work continues. What are you doing now?
Well, I'm doing various commissions, etc., as well as, they never stop. Artists never retire. But there is one project that I'm very pleased about. That's a labyrinth, a stone labyrinth that is being erected as we speak in the Falls Road in Belfast. I was invited by Martina Molière, who is a significant figure in numerous areas in the north, as a, how shall I put it, because he wanted to compliment me, though I didn't need the compliment, for taking the name Patrick Ireland to protest the Derry massacre in 1972. So he said, you were there when others were not. I don't think that's actually accurate, but it's a nice thought, a complimentary thought. But that, I hope, will mark, he asked me to mark the Falls Road, which I take as a great compliment. And let us hope it will be used by everyone from children playing in it to old men smoking their pipes and sitting on it.
Brian O'Doherty, thanks very much.
You're more than welcome, Vincent.
Artist Brian O'Doherty there. That's it from us. Next week, historian Sean Willents on his book Bob Dylan in America. Sarah Binchy produced tonight's programme. From all of us, good night.